Yeah, what you been up to? Any new readings or continued readings of your favorite three books? I think you mentioned, Zachary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just the fabric of reality is the main thing I've been reading recently and trying to understand what virtual reality means in David Deutsch's conception. That's been the main thing I've been looking at recently. Do you have an immediate understanding of virtual reality?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting. He kind of I guess there's like two takeaways for me maybe that like come to mind immediately, which is on the one hand, um, in a chapter, an exploration of like what kinds of experiences are possible. I guess like, what is like the limit of experience. And I guess like he draws the limit at things that are sort of like logically impossible. And then secondly, I guess the idea that I guess digging into the idea that we are currently experiencing a world, but we don't have any kind of direct or special access to it, and so it's sort of like that line in the Matrix where I don't know, it's like I don't know if I'm thinking the right line, but anyway, just like you were always in a virtual reality, you just didn't know it.
Right. Hmm.
Uh, so like kind of reminds me maybe of something like just yeah. There's this idea that like there's no escape from having like a theory or something like that. Like yeah. Anyway, yeah. So it is a cool chapter.
Yeah, I like it. And I like the connection between virtual reality and knowledge. Of course, he says that knowledge is a type of virtual reality generator, and it renders images in our mind of what we expect reality to be like, and then we will, have it match reality or not match reality, and that's one measure of how accurate the virtual reality rendering is, or how accurate our knowledge is. And then he also makes another jump with genes, saying that genes are embodied knowledge, which embody virtual reality renderings of their environment. So I want to understand all of that.
I do wonder what at what point you can say something is sort of rendering an environment versus is just computing 2 plus 2, or like telling you to build a certain machine. Because I think, like we mentioned, talked about last week, there's a difference between having like some instructions, like in your genome or in a recipe to tell you what to do, versus some kind of model of the world. Like there's a difference between sort of a game environment versus just a recipe. Um, and so I think you could say like, hey, I'm going to invent a world where I think this recipe makes sense. Like if this recipe exists, probably there's a world that exists that recipe was meant to, participate in. Um, but yet there's a difference between the recipe and that world. So you're sort of reconstructing on your own what world that recipe might have been involved in, but the recipe doesn't tell you. It doesn't actually tell you what the world is like
But yeah,
directly.
that's the rendering. Well, that's the idea, I think. As you're saying it, like if you're reading something, whatever you're reading is rendering something in your mind, right? So it's evoking images in your mind. So the mental impression is the virtual reality rendering. And if you have a recipe and you 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 assume that that recipe exists and it exists in some world, it has to exist in some world, and the impression of that world is going to be brought upon in your mind, which means that it is triggering a series of images, which means it is a virtual reality rendering. So I think that's the steps that David Deutsch makes. No, it's not extremely clear to me. This is why I'm trying to understand it, but I think that's the steps.
Yeah, I think that like the general question is like, what is the relationship between any mm, piece of information and some sort of environment you might construct? Uh, yeah, it's a bit tricky. I don't know. Like not everything is an environment, even though you might be able to say something has a relationship to some environment. Um, but yeah, I don't know.
And I should say, just to bring it all home, of course, my interest is beauty. So the connection that I'm making is that to understand beauty would be to understand the environments in which it can replicate in. So that would mean that you understand either the works of art that it could work in or the minds that it could work in. and I'm saying work, but I mean specifically it would survive in, or it would be causally tied to its own survival. So I feel like there's some there's some um, standard for what it means to appreciate beauty that's somehow in this conception of virtual reality, and it's a standard that most people don't attempt to reach.
Something's more beautiful if it survives in a larger variety of programs, of virtual reality programs kind of thing.
That is, yes, that would be one part of it, but I'm only thinking about the appreciation of it. So, in order to appreciate it, would be to understand which environments it can replicate in. So,
Mm.
yes, what you say is correct. To be able to replicate in more environments is one measure of beauty. But in order to appreciate the beauty is to understand which environments it replicates in. In the same way that to understand knowledge means to understand the reality that the knowledge is rendering, because the knowledge is rendering our reality. So anyway, that's
Gotcha.
the connection to what I'm interested in.
It makes me a little uneasy, I think, because in my head, the idea of trying to understand art by understanding something else is 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 what I think what confuses me, because it's almost like saying to really understand the sculpture, you need to understand the people around it. But I think it's more like the reverse. I would think like it's like you want to understand what is objectively special about the thing, and then that will tell you, I guess, incidentally, well, who will appreciate it if they happen to understand that thing. So yeah, it seems to me like something is flipped there by turning the attention away from the thing to sort of the environment around the thing.
What you're saying is, it seems similar here. If you're, I don't think it's understanding the work of art. What is being understood is the beauty within the work of art. But to understand the beauty, you have to understand the vehicles, which it would be. A vehicle would be a part of the environment that it replicates in. The vehicle would be the work of art. But to understand the beauty is to understand where that beauty can replicate.
I think that like the idea of replication is also sort of a secondary thing, maybe
Ooh.
because it's what really matters isn't even replication just in general. Like replication,
Survival of knowledge, I think, is the more general version of it, but it's just easier to say for me. It's easier for me to say replicate rather than which environment it would cause to make it survive.
well, that's yeah, but I think even if you're looking just at evolutionary things and at a gene, let's say, you could say, okay, in what environments will this thing survive? But really, that talking about the specific environments maybe is secondary because what really matters is like particular features of an environment. So you'd say, oh, like this, wings only work in an atmosphere. So we can talk about atmospheres in general, and you don't have to talk about any particular atmosphere. And so you could say, hey, like this painting, it involves a lot of, color is key to how this thing works. It is distinguished by its special use of color. And so you can just stop it there, full stop. And incidentally, you could say, hey, if you can't see color, you're not going to get this painting. But the thing which would be important is to maybe analyze this painting in light of other paintings and explain why it's different, if indeed it is. And so you could, just come up so somebody could show you 10 paintings. You could say, I'm just going to explore and compare these and see how I feel about each one. And if one of them turned out to be special for some reason, maybe you would hit upon the idea that color was the special thing. But really, at no point is it necessary, I think, at least in the first analysis, to like, look at any environment. You're just looking at these things, you're comparing them in terms of properties like color. So it's that property that matters, not any particular environment. But you can then go on and say, hey, like nobody would come up with this if they didn't have different pigments of different colors and didn't have the idea to do this. And
Mhm.
if they couldn't see that and appreciate it, then, they couldn't sell any paintings. And you could have many things that go beyond that. But it starts with that more intrinsic feature.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
I think I basically agree with Carlos on this. Like, I'm trying to think of an example that makes this concrete, and it's like, um, imagine there's like an ultraviolet color that we can't see, so no paintings are being made with that here on Earth, and so um, when you're thinking about that kind of painting, this particular Earth would not be part of the slice of the multiverse that it survives in. But it is almost, it's not wrong, but it's like almost unnatural a little bit to talk about it in those terms. as opposed to just in terms of like, oh, this is a special type of color that some organisms can see and some can't, as opposed to talking about it in terms of like that being the definition of like, this is the color that this slice of the multiverse can see, as opposed to in terms of its intrinsic properties. But at the end of the day, it's like one and the same thing, right? I think the organism evolution analogy is appropriate, where it's like, yeah, the um, if you study an organism, um, every aspect of it tells you something about its environment. Um, I'm trying to think of counterexamples, but um, it's like more natural to talk about the wings of a bird being like an aerodynamic object as opposed to, oh yeah, the wings of a bird are this thing that help in this slice of the multiverse where there's an atmosphere.
Mhm.
You know, I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's just like seems awkward and extra heavy to talk about it in that way.
Yeah, and I should say I'm on board with what you guys are saying, and I do think it's awkward and weird the way that I'm thinking about it because I'm trying to read the fabric of reality and David Deutsch's general philosophy and apply it to aesthetics, and it's taking me to weird places. So I want to go to those weird places and see what is actually there. If we indeed take any part of a work of art as embodying knowledge, then to understand the knowledge would mean to understand the environments in which it can replicate, or the environments which embody that knowledge, which is to mean, in the general sense, to understand knowledge is to understand our reality. So if it is the case that a work of art does embody knowledge, which I'm calling beauty, then those things should follow. And it does seem weird and it is a little bit odd, but that's sometimes things are weird and odd and counterintuitive.
Yeah. One thing to say that is, I think, maybe interesting is that when something replicates, that's sort of a secondary or like later consequence of like first assessing the quality of something. And so like the lion catches the gazelle, and that gazelle doesn't replicate. But that's what happens sort of at the end of the process is you sort of judge that. The beginning part is like the lion catching the gazelle. And so that's where you've sort of run this contest of speed, and you've made this assessment now about the subjective property of the relative speed of the two of them. Or more importantly, maybe the gazelle versus the nearby gazelle that was faster. So what you're really running here is a speed competition. And then, as a result of that, one gazelle replicates better than another. But again, that's sort of what happens later. So in the case of a painting, you could say, oh yeah, which one of these sells more or whatever. But that's what happens after this other assessment has been made. Like, okay, in somebody's head or in some machine somewhere, there was a thing that recognized color. Hence, this painting was deemed more valuable. And so the real question to me is maybe less about, um, which painting has more copies or anything like that, or which painting survives longer. And it's maybe more about just what criteria, according to what criteria does this painting win? And does it win? Um, like, and then all kinds of things could happen as a result of having judged that quality to be special. And so you could say, hey, I'm going to take this painting, I'm going to let nobody see it, I'm going to protect it hugely, I'm going to invest huge amounts of money into this painting, and I'm only going to show people a video screen of it because it's so valuable. I'll never let them get close to it. And that would be a way of treating that thing very specially. And that doesn't necessarily involve copying per se. Although you might say, hey, everybody seeing this painting is copying it in some sense. But even then, you could say, hey, it's so special, I'm not going to let anybody see it. I'm just going to take it for myself and put it in a in a subterranean lair for only me to appreciate. So again, you're investing a huge amount in this painting because you think it's special. But the real question is not what you did to this special painting, but why you think it's special in the first place. So that's, I think, where my head goes. It's all about the criteria that you use to assess the thing.
I was just thinking, I wonder how how do you sort of disentangle, in the case of art, you know, maybe you guys already mentioned this, but things that are not beautiful at all can replicate very well, throughout the throughout society, or artwork that is not beautiful, it seems, can replicate very well. So how do we, I don't know, how do you disentangle the two, and how do you know something's not replicating for other reasons, and just because it's uh, fecund, as high fecundity is replicating very well, how do you know that that's actually, because it has merit and not just some anti-rational or, temporary thing? So I don't know if that was mentioned, but that's what came to mind for me.
Yeah, in a world where everybody is definitely dumb, then like your fantastic painting that they can't appreciate will never spread.
Yeah,
So
well,
like,
things are only replicators in certain environments. So I wouldn't think that the work of art is not the thing that's the replicator. It's the beauty that's within the work of art. But in any case, the beauty, or we can just say the knowledge, just to make it even more general. The knowledge is the thing that is replicating, not the work of art. The work of art is a vehicle for the knowledge. Um, but yes, you could have things artificially boosted or artificially restricted. It would be somewhat difficult to untangle that, but you just put it into more environments or different environments. That's really kind of your only option there. And then you can open up to outside of a single universe view and look into the multiverse and have more options there to see different things and how it plays out in different worlds. Though we don't have direct access to that, of course, but that's
And
the angle to look at.
I guess a diversity of environments in one universe is like one universe's version of many universes.
Mhm.
And so,
Yes.
in thinking about AGI and stuff, yeah, I don't know if like dreaming is a way of creating multiple environments to, test ideas and explanations, and, battle test them. And if there's something more general about that, like a big part of evolution is, or I guess this would just be mental evolution of ideas, is coming up with many different environments. And yeah, that idea of knowledge being that which is consistent across universes seems is, well, a super cool idea, but also maybe there is something concrete about it, because you can kind of do that. You could, if you have an environment, you could have the computer make many alternatives of it and see what is consistent in all of them. And so maybe there's something actually, functional.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And that way of thinking, like you have knowledge and you put it into different scenarios in your mind, just imagination, and that's how you test the niche of the knowledge. Yeah.